Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here with us today. We're here for the Build Back Better Together Arts and Culture Focus team. And our topic today is public and private investment. And as with all of our topics in the series, we're responding to racial justice and COVID-19 in our conversation. This is the fourth in a series of virtual meetings where we have a discussion. We're happy to have some great conversation leaders with us today, and we'll get to the introducing them in just a minute. I'll give just a little bit of housekeeping. Um, let's see, we arrived at this topic based on our surveys at the beginning of this process. So thank you everyone for your input in those surveys. This is our fourth and final virtual meeting, and we'll start to turn our focus from here. We'll do another survey to gather more input in the process, and then we will start to turn our focus to creating a report. So you will hear from us via email as we move forward in that report, and we'll be asking for your feedback on the report to make sure that we are hearing you and reflecting your input. So we appreciate in advance your input via email. Just to remind everybody, we are all on Zoom today. We'll record the meeting and we'll record our chat so that if someone couldn't join us, they can see it later. So if you have questions, if you have feedback, if you have input, and you just got to let it out, please share it in the chat because that's really helpful to keep our conversation going, and we appreciate that. And you can find your chat on the bottom of your screen on the toolbar. You guys are all being so polite and keeping your microphone muted so that we can keep our sound working as best as possible. So I don't even need to touch on that because you're already doing it. So from here, I will give the floor over to our facilitator today, Gina Dunlap, to introduce our conversation leaders. Gina, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you all for being here and actively engaging in these important conversations as the world turns and continues to change. I think all of us are really grappling with the unknown and the uncertainty of what lays ahead. And particularly for the arts and creative organizations, it involves so much passion. I don't want to understate the importance of what the arts and the work and the energy that you pour into what you all respectively do, how much that means, and how, I understand and appreciate what you do because it nurtures so many aspects of our souls. And that's often hard to quantify. I come from an economics background. Um, like now I'm serving as a community investment specialist, and trying to make in some sense a business case for investing in equitable types of projects. But also I appreciate how difficult it can be to make a business case for the arts, right? Because I think sometimes we don't want to just reduce it, to a transactional thing. But at the end of the day, as a matter of survival, especially when you have an organization or an institution with a mission, there is a business component to what you do. And, certainly with the pandemic and how that's changed the way we move, how we gather, that has totally, and I would say undermined the arts in a very unique way. Because arts typically bring people together for various reasons in different formats in a very interpersonal way. And certainly now that we are socially distancing for the foreseeable future, it stands to reason that, this is an opportunity with a challenge to maybe reimagine how we bring or deliver the arts to people, in a post-COVID world. Digital infrastructure, we're doing it right now. Like, people around the world are experimenting with digital technology because in some ways it's actually brought us closer, right, than we otherwise would be, if we weren't using technology and video calls. But then also, particular to the Louisville experience with regard to the social justice movement, there are some anecdotes where even in the course of arts and arts programming, which seems generally, innocuous or harmless, that there are some people who are feeling and who have accounts of being sort of not considered or elevated or supported at a time when they need it the most in a city where being a hometown person, a hometown son or a hometown daughter, this is in fact the very time that people who are here and from here need to feel invested and see investment in them, in their talent, in a tangible way. So that's what the provocation questions are about when we get to them. Before I go there, I would like to introduce our other conversation leaders. So I'm really happy. Kristen Boom, President and CEO of the Fund for Arts. Hi, Kristen. Thank you for being here and all that you do. Ramona Lindsay, the Ramona Lindsay, artist, as well as a senior program officer at the Community Foundation of Louisville. Thank you for being here with us, Ramona. And then Miss Valerie Henderson, artist and center director for the Kentucky Small Business Development Center of Berea. I hear you all are doing some amazing things. Berea as a place has an amazing history with working outside of the box, I would say, in unconventional ways. So I'm really excited to hear your perspectives on this conversation. So let's see. This is my first time doing this event in your way. So I should then set the stage, Sarah, for how this happens.
Sure, sure. Or I can help
Okay.
if you want me to.
Okay, so the way we're going to use our time, we're going to have 2 rounds of question and discussion. The conversation leaders are going to respond to each question to give us their take from their unique perspective. And then we're going to divide into smaller groups to have more intimate conversations with one another around that same first question, and then come back and maybe share a little bit. And we're going to go through that round 2 times. So question, hear from our conversation leaders, chew it up amongst ourselves in a small, intimate way, and then come back, share to some degree, and then go into the second question. Did I get that right, Sarah?
You totally got it. And the only reminder I'll put in is when you go into the small breakout group, just remember to introduce yourself to one another.
Great. Okay, so let's kick it off with the first question. Or before I do that, are there any questions from our participants? You guys good? Okay. First question. When it comes to advocating for the arts and creative industries, what's more important? Funding, money, or access? Right? And I'm using the word access deliberately because, we're talking about equity and equitable investments, equitable outcomes. Equity in some ways is related to money and value, but it's also connected to access. So what alternative forms of support can create impact? Because money is not the only resource that matters, in my opinion. But I'd love to hear first from Miss Lindsay, Mona Lindsay, please.
All right, Miss Gina, going to start with me. Um, Access or funding? I believe it is access because as a Black artist, I am always challenged with the funding piece. And so I have creatively figured out ways to create my art without funding. But once I create that artwork, I have not always had the access to the spaces and the people who can help me further my artistic practice and my artistic career. And I think without that access, even if you do have adequate funding, if you don't get into the right spaces, the right rooms, don't have access to the information to drive your practice, then no matter how much funding you throw at the issue, um, then I don't think you'll have full, I don't think everyone will reach their full potential. So to me, I think access is extremely important. Funding is as well, but you have to have access to the information, the knowledge, the tables, the decision making opportunities. A lot of times, artists are invited to tables, but really don't have any real decision making power at those tables. And I think all of that has to do with access and involvement and inclusion. So
Thank you, Ramona.
I'll stop there and let's see what others have to say.
Miss Henderson, would you like to jump in?
Certainly, even though Ramona's a hard act to follow. But I simply would echo what Ramona said for a lot of reasons, in that creatives are also creative thinkers.
Mhm.
And one of the main things that I do in my job is help creatives run successful businesses, because we can't always rely on grants. And I feel like if they've got all the tools that they need to understand business practices, and they're working at making their own money and rising on their own. The other side of access, like Ramona said, is making sure that everyone has the tools that they need to run their business and to be in those spaces that Ramona described. So for me, that often means, our services, I'm an employee actually of UK, but it's funded through the federal government. It's making sure that everyone has access to our free services to help them grow, to help them understand how to run a business. I also think about ways, I'm an artist as well. I think about ways to make sure that I'm in those spaces and that people can get to see my work. So that can mean participation from a lot of agencies. It can mean having free transportation on free public transportation. It can mean having events that don't have huge admission prices. It can mean thinking creatively and making sure that our offerings are including everyone, that the offerings are diverse as well. I wouldn't want to think about creating work in a show that half of the population has no interest in. I want my work to be authentic, but I want it to be relatable. So in trying to find that common ground for creators to be able to share their voice, and hopefully to help create new markets, for people to understand and want to see that new type of work that maybe they're not familiar with. So we take on the role of being educators. We take on the role of being resources.
Great. Kristen, please.
So these two ladies are, certainly, I would agree with what they have to say. I also have to agree with what they have to say as it relates to individual artists. If I was to flip the script and just I was trying to think, how do I make sure I don't come in and say exactly the same thing, right? How do I play either thinking at it from a different level? One of the things that I want to say is that access to information, access to networks, access to power, capacity building, all of that is absolutely critical. And funding may be a one-time or and so having the building the networks, the capacity, the learning that both Ramona and Valerie were talking about will be the kind of work that that makes those artists sustainable, makes that work, well beyond just one grant or one investment at a time, right? One thing I want to make sure that as we think about access versus funding is the flip side of that. And it is the flip side of that, which says that oftentimes we, as artists and as arts organizations, are mission-based, compassionate beings who want to share and their work broadly. And often, many give it away for well below what the value. I think, so the flip side, so it's not an either or, but just thinking about the flip side is making sure that whether as artists or as organizations, that we are marketing, like Valerie was talking about, or sharing the actual value of what we are providing. And so making sure that we are asking for what it is worth and expecting that, as opposed to, and I would say this is both on individual artists, but also especially on nonprofit arts and cultural organizations, which we know that art can heal a community. So we want to make sure it's everywhere, but we don't always ask for that to be supported in the way that it needs to be supported. I think oftentimes our public then expects that those things are free and widely accessible, and it's someone else's, someone else is going to figure out how to make that possible. And we all believe that art should be accessible to everyone. We want that to happen. We all believe it in our core. We all work at it to make it happen. But the reality of that is that it also takes funding to make that art accessible to everyone. And so if I'm thinking about whether it is a nonprofit arts organization in an under-resourced neighborhood, that to provide wide access to that work, that needs funding. It can be earned through ticket sales or through revenue generation, or it can be contributed through philanthropic or through public funding. But I think we need to make sure that when we talk about access, we as a community, access to the arts for everyone in our community, that takes money, and it takes a commitment to supporting that. And so one of the things in this community is that on the public funding side, we haven't necessarily been able to make the case for our community as to why that is important. So I just, I think Ramona and Valerie, if I would have gone first, I would have probably gone with access, but I also wanted to make sure that we also rounded out with the funding side as well, is that it is critical for this work, and that there is that investment to be able to make that work, whether it's individuals or organizations, widely accessible.
Thank you, Kristen, for rounding out those perspectives. And I guess part of the inspiration around the question is to remind us all that money in and of itself often doesn't solve complex problems, especially if you don't know to what end, how you're going to direct those funds, right? And that sometimes what I'm trying to do is challenge us to think about the end game, not how we get there. Because what I've found is, in some examples, if I can articulate what my end game is, sometimes that just shows up and I don't actually need the money to create this thing and do all this work that I thought I had to do. Like if I'm clear about where I'm going, what the end game should look like, there are some opportunities for that to fall into place without going through a fundraising cycle. And it looked like Ramona and Valerie, like y'all wanted to maybe respond and react to before we go into small groups.
I wanted to respond to the second part of your question where you said, what other alternative forms of support do we need? And as Kristen was talking about funding, I heard someone say recently that your budgets reflect your priorities. And in our city budgets, the arts are not one of the large budget items, if at all. And so I think one of our things that we need as support are mechanisms so we can advocate for changes in public policies that will allow for the sustained funding of the arts. So we do have access at all those different levels that Kristen articulated, but not just for individual artists, but for our organizations as well, because those organizations are tools, are vehicles for access for not just the creative, but also those who are experiencing our the art product. And I think a lot of times we think of art as a commodity, and it's only those who have the right amount of money can have access to that commodity. And I think if we're really going to talk about equity and access, then our public policy has to reflect a priority of making the arts accessible to all individuals, organizations, and all of those who are experiencing that art.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes.
So I'll just add to that a little bit in that if we think of the value of art in community development, if we take out economic development and look at community development, and Gina, when you were talking, you mentioned it's quality of life and how it's difficult to measure that. But if we think about when corporations are hiring new talent, when they're trying to attract people to Louisville, for example, what is the first thing that they sing about? They talk about a lot of the programs and efforts of the Fund for the Arts. We are a city that has a high number of arts organizations. But if we take it small and go into individual communities within the city and ask the question, what is their end game? What is it that would make a difference in their communities? I'm also a facilitator for a program called the AIR Institute, and Berea College used to own the license to that, but actually I have new news that as of next year, the SBDC will own those licenses. But an example, we went into Paducah and met with community leaders there, and their need, their end game was a greater use of their public parks, or they were going to be they were going to lose their charter and be turned into something else. And so how do we get more people into the parks? We started talking about arts programs for children in the summer. We started talking about what's the big need for children during the summer when they're not in school. They're missing out on the food that they get in summer at their school, in the winter at their schools. So bringing all those different organizations together and understanding how they can contribute. Ended up that there was a private landscaping company, not the city folks that do all the mowing in the parks, because they were actually saying they weren't going to mow it anymore because they felt like they were mowing it just for themselves. So then a private landscaping company steps forward and says, we're going to mow the parks if you'll have these events, these activities in there for the community. If you'll get people in there, then we'll step up. And I think that's it. It's getting everybody on board and understanding that value that the arts have to our communities.
Mhm.
I think arts institutions and practitioners are often overlooked as community stakeholders. But also, to your point about, talent retention, right? Mental health. I mean, if you look at, like if the internet were to go off today and we couldn't get to our Netflix to watch our shows,
Yeah, be bad.
there'd be a crisis on hand, but people fail to make that connection. When you think of all the famous people, accomplished people that are from Louisville, that are known around the world, on a national scale, I can't help but connect our culture of arts here to their ability to find a lifelong career and accomplishment in that, right? So it's overlooked. I think it's undervalued, but I think, to Kristen's point, we've got to be able to make the case for the value added, right? And then make sure that and again, value in itself is not all about money, right? So with that, I think, is it time now to go into our small groups, Sarah?
Yes, it is. So you'll get a message on your screen about going into a small breakout group. If you have any problem, just yell out and I'll help you out, and we'll get everyone in a group. We'll be in there for about 10 minutes of conversation. You'll get a warning or a reminder on your screen to come back to the main group at the end of that time, and reminder to introduce yourselves to one another. You should be about 3 people in each group. Here we go. Okay. Mr. Hallett, can you hear me? Did you get an invitation for a breakout room?
Yes.
Okay, great, good. Senator McGarvey, if you can hear me, there should be an invitation for you to go to breakout room 1. Okay, welcome back, everybody. As you're making your way back to the main meeting room, still waiting on a few more people. They must be deep in conversation.
Sarah, we only had 2 people in our room. Well, we
Yeah, somebody dropped out right when you all started your breakout, so you guys got a one-on-one.
Yeah, we did.
But Miss Elmer just arrived, so we'll put her.
Hello, Ramona.
Hi, Miss Emma Lucille.
Well, I'm gonna make your phone call when I get off this meeting.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're all back. So Gina, I'm going to pass it back to you. If we want to call on a couple, we had 6 groups, breakout groups. So if we want to kind of randomly call out maybe 2 groups to share some thoughts, some takeaways.
Is this volunteering or soliciting actual volunteers? If there is a volunteer, if you want to just sort of unmute or raise your virtual thumb. Anyone? Any thumbs out there? I thoroughly enjoyed. Okay, yes, please. M. Hallett?
Elma Lucille. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Elma Lucille.
I'm
Welcome,
fine.
welcome. Did you want to share from your small group, Mrs.?
No, I wasn't. I was late coming. I just now got here.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Go
Can't
for
share.
it. Go
Okay.
for it.
Glad to see your face.
M, go for it.
Hi. Well, I think, a couple of things that we discussed, and I have to apologize, I kind of monopolized the conversation, but I think we both came to the agreement that you don't necessarily always have to have funds from the audience point of view in order to have access. But even in those situations, the producers of the art, they have to be compensated. I mean, it's only right that at some point money does enter into the equation. And I just say that because, my background has been in live entertainment for the most part. And maybe it's a little different for the individual artists because I've met many artists who just cannot stop creating. It's in their DNA. So at that, I do see that point of view, but in a lot of other situations, one way or the other, money does enter into the equation. Other than that, I see the comment here that I also brought up in the group that for me, we have a hurdle in that we would love to attract young college kids into the city for a summer. Unfortunately, there's just not enough funds for us to provide a stipend and to provide housing. So if there was some mechanism by which we could open up housing for these young artists and craftsmen that I can attract into the city and pay them a stipend to live, that would be great from at least my point of view from my facility. And my facility is the Iroquois Amphitheater. So, and then we talked a little bit about the other challenge that I have, which is many times, and for instance, the ballet and the opera company, they go off contract in the summer. So for a facility like mine, who basically runs in the summer, there's just no way to be able to do some of the programming that we would like to do. So that's all I've got.
Yes, I would challenge a bit, in terms of the experience I just had at Harvard University with the Lowe Fellowship. I stayed in a multi-million-dollar mansion for free. Meals were often provided at no cost, right? So when you think about, and the stipend is relevant, and we got a stipend, and that's relevant. But when you think about what people need the stipend for, if you can address those needs, that certainly takes some of the pressure off of the need to provide actual cash. I just want to say that. Anybody else want to share reflection on the conversation we just had? Carol, yes.
Yes, I was assigned to report for my group with Kristen and Lisa. Kristen's laughing. We circled around various topics, but we were talking mainly about money and the need for a sort of comprehensive citywide solution to this, which it has proven really difficult to do through the kind of tax referendum that other cities have been able to fund the arts through. And we ended up concluding that it's going to take long-term advocacy, work with the Metro Council, and showing people the benefits to the city as a whole of programs like the Cultural Pass, which originally was, an absolutely wonderful idea and good for the community, but needed real funding to make it work for the organizations and the artists that they support. So it's not an easy answer, but it should be more comprehensive than each organization, each artist having to figure it out on their own. So that was, does that sound fair, Lisa and Kristen, who were there in the conversation?
I appreciate that, Carol. And, again, just because I just can't help but be provocative, but like, I hear you say, that say in the example of the cultural pass, that it needed funding. But I would always say, for what purpose? Like, who's not being made whole? How is the money being utilized? Because a lot of times people that have resources, whether they be monetary, other, if they just hear that you need funds, as opposed to that you need housing, that you need space, that you need to cover liability insurance, that you need to cover, I think again that gets you closer to people showing up with resources that may potentially address more needs than you might expect. And I'll leave it at that. Just again for the sake of thought. But I think now we're going to move on to our next question. I'm going to pull that up here. And question 2, also related: if art and business are intertwined, what alternative business and delivery models can be applied to creative industry? Therein, in response to the COVID pandemic that's here for the foreseeable future, and changing the way we engage, and or the economic crisis, right? So early in the discussion, I talked about our need to pivot. And in order to be resilient, we need to be adaptable, right? To trying new methods of how we organize, how we do business, how we share resources, trade, or even barter resources. I'll give you just a bit of perspective. I'm also a board member for the Louisville Community Grocery, which is a cooperative initiative, a cooperative for-profit business. We right now have about 300 owners, right? And have about $55,000 in equity from the ownership shares that have been purchased. Our objective is to build a grocery store. That's really hard. I'm learning so much about the grocery industry. But we also have a sister organization called the Louisville Association for Community Economics. They are here to support cooperative business models being applied to any number of business activities, right? So any business can potentially be formed as a cooperative, which spreads risk, spreads equity across a large number of people, for the greater good. So, whether that's a gallery, whether that's a shoe store, I'd love to see a cooperatively owned consignment shop, right? The model can be applied to many things. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are with regard to alternative business models. And I think because this is really a specialty for you, Valerie, if you wouldn't mind speaking on that first.
Thank you. I was writing down some thoughts from your comments. We kind of start with using business terms and apply those to the creative sector. Pivot is certainly a business term. Part of the creative industries, a lot of folks think that just implies arts organizations, but actually the Americans for the Arts have put out a pretty good definition of what those industries are. It often includes tourism activities, and it includes culinary arts. It includes restaurants. And so if we think of all the places recently, the restaurants, we know that that industry has been hurt the most by this. And folks that never in their life thought they would be offering carryout. Boone Tavern here in Berea. I love Boone Tavern. I love it. But when this first started happening, they weren't having it. We are not doing carryout. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do then? How are you going to sustain? And so for me, it was a matter of going in and helping them. We looked at the menu together and what items on the menu could support being transported across town and would be okay if it was heated up, and what kinds of things just traveled better. And it came down to that. I said, so I'm a potential client. Ask me what I want from Boone Tavern to take home with me. Okay, what do you want, Valerie? I want fried chicken. I want spoon bread. I want chicken and dumplings. I want those things. And through that, we talked through it, and it became, we wanted Sunday dinner. So the only thing that you can do as carryout from Boone Tavern is you can order Sunday dinner. So they were looking at it as a way of working efficiently. So they could create these groups of meals, and over I've seen that's what restaurateurs are doing. They're making different food, but they're making food that can be made in bulk and then disseminated out. So it's looking at that business model. How can we work as clean and efficient as possible, because we're probably going to be working with fewer people. But how can we still put our brand forward? How can we still offer what we're known for? It takes planning. It takes, again, community engagement. It takes that feedback from the people that you're serving. What is it that they want most? What is it that they need? And then trying to find a way on how to deliver that.
Thank you so much for that. Kristen, what are your thoughts, really from an institutional perspective and the sort of the broad nature of the organizations that you serve and represent?
I mean, there's been over the years and recently, again, there's a lot of collaboration between organizations. A lot of that collaboration is artistic. So the organization, institutions know how to do artistic collaboration really well. Thinking about how to build greater cooperative across the business sides. So some of the things that have worked over the years are certainly back office shared services. That's always something that sounds easier than it is, frankly, but certainly something that there are great models that are here locally, but also nationally. Some of the things you were talking about, like the grocery store and some of those things, cooperative galleries, Zephyr is an incredible example of a national model that has been here in Louisville and has been here, and Martha could tell us probably more about that than I could, but I think for 30 years. And so there are some great examples, but we need to rethink that. I think, so galleries, for theaters, one of the big challenges for many of our performing arts is often rehearsal space and performance space. That comes up again and again, and it's expensive to own and maintain the facility. So But then to be able to share that space and enough where is an ongoing challenge. I think it's certainly something when our real estate in downtown Louisville seems like could be something that could be easier to. I say that at the time that we are selling art space, which was ours, which was created almost 20 years ago as a collaborative space for creatives, but didn't, worked for many years. But most recently, the interest declined, and we had out of 8 floors that were available, 2 completely empty, and another half that, half to another full one that was empty. So, so whether or not that location, so it may be that there are different locations and different setups that work now, where that worked 20 years ago. So those are some of the things I think. There's been a lot. There's a lot of opportunity around production studios, production equipment. Again, what's the kind of equipment that artists need that they don't need every single day, whether it's production equipment, whether it's, and I'm again looking at the my visual artists in the room, like kilns or things like that you actually don't need every single day. There's been and I think that there's also this here locally, our Logan Street Market is a good example of a way that a space has been provided for artists, for retailers, for small restaurateurs, where you don't have to invest in the large facility or the maintenance of it, but that you but that provides artists or budding entrepreneurs or retailers to be able to kind of cut their teeth, build their market in a different way. So certainly, that Logan Street Market idea, like makerspace, but those spaces are certainly ways we need to continue to think about how do we share that overhead in a way that supports many.
Can I add to what Kristen just said real quickly?
Sure.
You used Logan Street as an example. And they were my clients when I was in Louisville, and I still work with Louisville clients. I have a young woman that's starting a mobile grocery.
Mm-hmm.
And what did she need? She needed a place to park that truck. And Logan Street came forward and said, you can park it here however often you want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great example. Yes, Ramona, please.
And I was just, when I read the article this morning about the Fund for the Arts space being sold, I started to think about how can we cooperatively repurpose spaces that are currently vacant, strip malls. Like I was thinking about Southland Terrace Shopping Center, which is a huge strip mall that is easily accessible on a bus line, that is in a part of the city that's under-resourced. How could that space be reutilized by creatives, by artists? And I think that during these times now, it's essential for us all to kind of think outside of the box, and how do we pull together or stitch together the minimal resources that we have so we create something that's much larger that we can all sustain collectively together. Because we don't know what the future is going to hold, but if we are able to create something that's extremely adaptable, then I think that we better support our own longevity. And as a visual artist, a lot of our work is based on people being able to see it and experiencing it up close and personal, making that personal connection with that tangible piece of work. And since we are unable to get into a lot of those spaces, I think it's important for us as visual artists to figure out other ways that we can connect with people and introduce our works to people, so that we remain relevant and important, even though our work may not be easily accessible right now? How can we make some representation of that work accessible? And so I think it's important for us to continue to build peer networks during this time, where we're sharing ideas, where we're sharing strategies, uh, where we're introducing each other to software that's helping us to create those virtual gallery experiences or virtual exhibition experiences. And even how can we look at ways that we make that software, that technology accessible to more people. So there's not like, everyone doesn't have to have a huge outlay of income in order to have access to those tools that will help us pivot.
That's amazing. Yes, Kristen.
I just might say that one thing that I have found in the years that I think that especially at a time like this, so there's a challenge, right? We've got this. One is that people don't want to share because they want, like, I want my space. I want my space where I can, whether it's a rehearsal space, whether it's a gallery, whether it's a studio, whether it's an office, like, I should be able to have, and I agree that that is the best case scenario, but I often, when we try to, find these spaces and say, how do we share? It's not easy to share. And so I just wonder and maybe it's a time in a pandemic with a real, we are in a time we've never been, that we have to completely shift that. But there's, I just wanted to, like, kind of put the gorilla in the room, that it's easy to talk about. It's not always so easy to do. And so how do we help find the real, what is the incentive, and how do we help each other to respect the shared space as much as we might our own space? I think that there might be some great discussion in the breakouts around that for anyone that's had experience in that.
And Kristen, I think that also comes back to the culture that we have created in this country, where everyone has to have their own. And I'm the best if I have my own, instead of looking at this being a collective, and how do we build real community together, and how do we share and work in that community. So I really think it begins with a cultural shift. Mm-hmm. And as long as we create environments where organizations have to compete against each other for resources to exist, then I think we're going to continue that mindset. I've got to have mine because that's the only way I can survive. So I think we have to create an environment where survival is dependent on all of us working collectively in this space.
Excellent, Ramona. I mean, I feel like, well, first of all, this community has a culture of talking about a lot of things without putting the action behind it. And in my, short number of lived years, anything that's actually worth doing is going to be difficult. It doesn't change the need or, the motivation to do it. I think being intentional and acknowledging the value that, like, if your mere existence is dependent upon being collaborative and working cooperatively, on some level that should be some incentive, right? As opposed to going completely out of business and being dislocated in your practice, right? Like, because that's what a lot of people are looking at and staring at in the face right now. If I, just from a residential perspective, had to choose between sleeping on the street and, go into my mother's house, right? I might choose my mother's house, no matter how difficult or inconvenient it may be, because the idea is the end game is I don't want to be homeless or on the street, literally. So I think the acknowledgement of the scarcity mentality versus acknowledging and embracing cooperative, collaborative ideas, that's an opportunity that's staring us in the face, and every opportunity comes along with challenges. But just listening to Ramona talk about visual art made me think, wow, like I may not be in the gallery to see her art piece, but I would love to sit and listen to her on a podcast describe her art and her practice and what inspires her and what this work in particular meant to her. Because I don't get that when I go to the gallery, but I could get that in this new age. And if there was a communal studio where, Kristen, as you noted, you didn't have to buy all the fancy equipment to have high quality sound and production, that's another way to pivot in a sense, be adaptable, and deliver the art and the experience in a way that maybe, 2 years ago you never would have even attempted to do, right? So I think with that, we're ready to move into our small group discussions, and Miss Wizard, Sarah Lindgren, is going to allocate us across, I guess, several groups now.
Okay, here we go.
Remember to introduce yourselves.
That's right. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Kristen.
Hi,
Hello.
Lee. Hi, Allison and Destiny.
Lee, you're not in the library today.
Well, I traveled to Alabama for some family business, and so now I'm quarantining for 14 days.
Oh my goodness. Good luck. Welcome back, everyone. Our other groups are in deep conversation. Here they come. Welcome back, everyone.
Time flies when we're having fun.
That's right. Okay, I think we have everybody. Gina?
Our conversation was getting too good and we had to come back.
Oh man, I was like, I was blowing it out with a brilliant thought. Wasn't I, Ramona?
Yes, you were talking about repurposing derelict buildings and for cooperative art spaces and stuff, and then we came back.
Well, Brian, why don't you kick us off on sharing from this wonderful small group discussion?
Well, I think that, I was kind of, thinking about Ramona's conversation and and I think the challenge that Kristen put, when we start talking about people, kind of sharing space. And I think part of it is not so much around, locating the buildings. I think it's a long-term kind of policy development within the arts and with the economic development community, to engage the arts at a much higher level in that conversation early on, because one of the things I do find in a lot of, community development, there's a lot of interest in attracting artists in there initially, but not a real conversation about how they invest themselves intentionally for a long-term development for their own benefit, and for the community's development, So I don't think that, in my mind, has been articulated well enough, as a program, a policy, or a way of thinking. Gretchen, I know you think about these things pretty deeply, but, I don't think I've seen it, adequately thought out and created as a kind of a plan, here to engage the arts in that kind of level of conversation. So, it's more than just, giving arts access for temporary opportunity to use a space. Is like, how do you actually invest in this? What is their benefit for doing that? And what's the overall intention, that would assist the artists and the community at the same time?
Awesome. Miss Wheatley or Miss Green, I would love to hear from you if you're willing to share?
I will go, I guess.
Thank you.
So, not a problem. Um, well, hello everyone. Let me just start off with that. So pretty much, we were speaking on about collaboration in our group and the importance of it, the necessity of it, because being basically closed off to those opportunities can honestly end up being way more destructive to your business or the plight of your career, or the plight of like branding or expanding your artistry.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
very much for sharing. And I'm
You know,
looking
I'll
at,
go. I'll go. So in our group, it kind of is a parallel conversation. We were talking about that people have a need for community, and that's one of the things we're all missing right now, I think. And yet, through our virtual life with our institutions, we've actually expanded audiences, which is very interesting. In that, a museum lecture that might have had 150 people will now have 500 people because you don't have to be there. So in a way, the arts are reaching more people. But that the fact that people need community, and arts need audience. And so those two kind of overlapping intentions, I think, help drive people towards the arts and towards community both. And I was listening to a podcast with Aaron Betsky, who's and Gretchen, you probably know him. He's the head of the Virginia, he's the director of the Virginia Art and Architecture School, University of Virginia. And he was talking about the fact that our cities are going to be changing. Our post-COVID world will show that we do not need to inhabit these buildings. And it's a real crisis for these cities to figure out how to repurpose these structures that we have, and how, possibly a library will also become a community center, where it also might become a polling place. I mean, we do it in somewhat, like where we use, churches for polling, but how that we will probably have overlapping purposes for more buildings and a lot of derelict buildings. And in a way, that's an opportunity. It's sort of sad that the arts get dragged in when there's no one else around, or they need to fill storefronts. But at the same time, it could be an opportunity to revitalize areas that have been shut down and boarded up with art, which would be an incredible way to kind of literally and sort of in a kind of healing way help our towns and help our cities reopen.
Thank you for that, Martha. I think one of the key things that came up in our conversation was that art is essential and that art needs an audience. And I'll add that it needs innovation. Ms. Green, you would like to comment before we start to wrap up our conversation?
Yes, a few things that we talked about with my group was the nonprofit that I was starting, as far as going back to the first question with giving access and actual financial resources. And we also talked a little bit about the business part of it. And I know that personally, I was, what could you think of that hasn't already been done? And as far as COVID is concerned, I actually have a friend that's in Lexington that builds virtual reality art galleries, and with an actual virtual reality mask. So as far as the innovation for the technology, that is already, kind of been thought of. But we also talked about the people, I think, Alicia, you said it was like 60,000 people that don't have access in Jefferson County to the internet in their homes, and how that's still going to give like a gap for the people who don't. So that was just a few of the discussions that we talked about.
Thank you so much for your input, and thank you everyone that has been really, really engaged in this conversation. It's an important one. It's not limited to the arts and creative industries, but as usual, the artists are on the front lines and being proactive and ahead of the curve in so many ways. And I expect that to continue. Thank you to Kristen for your insights, to Valerie for sharing what you do, and Ramona for being the wonderful you are. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Sarah Lindgren.
Thank you. And I will say a special thank you to Gina Dunlap for being our fabulous facilitator today. Thank you so much. And I will echo Gina and saying thank you to our 3 conversation leaders. You were great leaders for us today. And thank you for all of our participants for sharing your time. I know time is maybe perhaps our most valuable asset right now. So thank you for your time, opening your minds and your hearts and sharing your ideas with us. And as Gina said, being very engaged in the conversation. I'll do just a really quick housekeeping repeat of what I said at the beginning in case people missed it as they were signing in, that this is our 4th and final session, virtual meeting in this conversational format. We will follow up this meeting with a survey. So please watch your emails for yet another survey. I know we've surveyed you several times, but we appreciate your input, and it's also helpful for our group who can't always be here for the virtual meeting to engage through the survey as well. And then we will kind of change gears and start to focus on drafting a report to capture this process. So we will be coming back to you via email to ask for your input and feedback in terms of whether our report captures what you experienced in this process. So thank you in advance for that. And that is it for today. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to communicating with you in the future. Thank you, everybody.